Hi, I'm Wendy Robinson Miller. I am a clinical supervisor at Handspring Health, and I'm so excited to be doing this training with you all today. And the goal today is really to give an overview of dialectical behavioral therapy or DBT treatment and a sense of the different skill sets that DBT can support in schools. And really, I want you to have some concrete skills that you can start using with your students today. So to get started, we're going to want to zoom out just a little bit. So we know that we are seeing an increase across the board in children experiencing mental health crises. And I don't really need to tell you guys that because you see it every day in the school. But what I want to also point out is that although we're identifying kids that are needing mental health support, about 50% of children who've been identified aren't actually able to access specialized behavioral health care. And that is really important when we're thinking about how are kids functioning in school. So when we see kids that aren't able to access the care or are starting to demonstrate behaviors, you might see things like school refusal increasing, more aggressive behaviors at school, thinking about kids experiencing and sharing an increase in suicidal thoughts or non-suicidal self-injury, all of these things which I'm sure you are seeing. And what is happening, I think, with the increase of children needing more support in mental health is that schools are increasingly the place where that behavior and those concerns are being identified, reported, and now asking you to respond and support these challenges, which can put enormous pressure on you as a provider in the school and in the system in general. We're thinking about limited budgets and how do we make sure that they're getting the educational needs met along with social and emotional needs. And I think this is where DBT can be really helpful in the school setting in terms of thinking about how do we streamline interventions and support the work that you're already doing. So in order to kind of start thinking about DBT skills, we need to understand what DBT is. So dialectical behavioral therapy is designed to really look at how do we help people feel like they are moving towards and living a life that matches their values, their goals, and feels worth it to them to learn the skills, to learn how to handle these situations differently. So DBT was really developed to teach practical and accessible skills that can replace problem behaviors that can make situations worse or keep us stuck in patterns of behaviors that aren't helping us or moving us towards our goals. And so at the center of this idea is that we need to find a lot of balance. So balance is this idea that two things can be true and seemingly opposite at the same time. So that's the dialectic. So the most common one that we talk about in DBT is this idea of acceptance and change, and really wanting to make sure that we're balancing those. So for example, if you take a kid who's really struggling, let's say with ADHD symptoms, and you're talking to that kid and they say, well, I can't do it. I have ADHD and there's nothing we can do about it and nothing I can do about it. That's leaning really heavily on that acceptance place, right? Like, this is who I am and we just have to deal with it. You can see how that would make it hard to move towards change, right? You can't see a way to do things differently. So leaning really hard on the acceptance puts us out of balance. On the other hand, we often see saying like, well, they should be able to do this. That's not an excuse. You need to do better, really leaning in on change. And if we're only thinking about change and not acknowledging that, hey, it's kind of really tough to be a kid in school with ADHD, we are again off balance and it makes it really hard to make a plan to move forward. Some of the common dialectics that you might be thinking about in schools, particularly for like middle school, high school, is finding that balance between the developmentally appropriate desire to kind of be more independent and balance that with, I still need other people. I'm still dependent on other people to help me be successful. And I think about this as a way to start creating a shared language, right? You can do hard things even when you feel overwhelmed. So helping kids notice that, like, hey, you've done this before. It's okay to be overwhelmed. I can accept and validate that. And you can do hard things, right? So we start to look for this balance. Another kind of key part of DBT is the DBT assumptions. So, an assumption is a belief that cannot be proven, but we agree to abide by it anyway. I tend to think of these as like a set of beliefs that inform my worldview, right? So, the first assumption is pain is part of life. We have all experienced physical and emotional pain. Pain is unavoidable. And when we refuse to accept pain as a reality, we tend to want to push it aside, avoid, engage in other activities that really bring down that pain sensation. And typically, particularly in teens, that comes in the form of like these more high risk behaviors, substance abuse, the non-suicidal self-injury, thoughts of suicide, things like that. So when we refuse to accept that pain is part of life, it actually in the long run causes more suffering versus if we kind of acknowledge that that's going to happen and you know what, I can do hard things and I can move through that. The next idea is that if you are undergoing therapy, you want to improve. And I tend to believe that all people want to improve their lives. And what gets in the way is not the desire to improve, but not always having the skill to do so. So this is where I think the skills in DBT are really essential in moving us towards that life worth living, is that we can get skills that build on our own motivation for things to be better. The next two kind of go hand in hand. And I often have people say, oh, how can you have both of these? But it kind of goes back to that idea of the dialectic and finding balance. So the first one is right now, you are doing the best you can. So wherever you are watching this video, wherever your students are today, you're all giving the best that you can in that moment. And how I think about this is I think about a student who went home last night, had a great evening with their family, a good dinner, went to bed, had a really nice night of sleep, wakes up on time, has enough time to have a good breakfast, gets on the bus, notices that maybe the kid who really gives them a hard time on the bus isn't on there that day. So they're already feeling a little bit more confident. They've not had to deal with anything that might shake how they're feeling about themselves or how their day is going. They get to school, their best friend is there, they talk about something that they really both love, and now it's time to go to math and take a test. So think about that student and how they might be prepared for that test. If you take that same student and you change it to where last night they went home, they had a really hard time with their family, and that caused them to lose a lot of sleep. Once they finally fell asleep, they sleep through their alarm, and now they're waking up to their mom or dad saying, oh my God, you got to get up. You're running late. I can't believe you slept through your alarm. The bus is coming down the street. You need to go. So they're rushing around. They're trying to get everything together. They don't have time for breakfast. They get on the bus and, this day, the kid that really bothers them is just on it and really going after them and not giving them a break. So they're already feeling tired, hungry, and now they're getting all this negative input. They get to school and they see that their best friend is gone, out sick, and now they have to go take a test. And they walk into the room and they sit down for that math test. Whatever brought that student to that moment is the best that they have. And you can see how that can impact how they're going to perform on that test, right? So it's just kind of building awareness and understanding that we bring what we can given everything that happens before. On the other hand, we have this idea that right now you can do better, and we may need to do better and try harder, right? So we're going to start looking for this balance. In this moment, you're doing the best that you can with whatever brought you to this moment. And in the very next deep breath, we might need to do better and try harder. And that's really how do we utilize the skills that we're talking about? How do we take a moment to really think about how we want to respond and what we can do, right? So you can see how these two things working together can be really helpful. The next thing is that new skills must be learned in all contexts. So you could be having the best skills group at school with your selected group of students, and you're teaching something and they're really into it and they're practicing it. But if that's the only time they're doing it, right? The only time that they're really engaged or thinking about it is in this group once a week, we're not going to see the benefit of that skill, right? It's really hard to learn new things that we need in times of stress if we're only practicing them once. So this is the idea of where in schools we could really start talking about building a shared toolbox and a shared language so that they're practicing it maybe in homeroom, and that we make sure that we're calling home to parents and saying like, hey, this is a skill that I think would work really well. And I just want you to know about it in case you see your child practicing it, or if you want to kind of go over it with them. And so then we start to see that there's multiple opportunities for the brain to really take in that information, practice it, and get stronger. And the last one is really a hard one too, and particularly I think for kids and teens. So you may not have caused all your problems, and you are still responsible for solving them. And I think about this as the kid who's like, it's so unfair that I have to do this, right? And the truth is, it might be unfair that you have to do this, and no one else is going to solve that problem for you or help you move forward, right, to get past this barrier. And as caregivers and providers, we have this really nice and wonderful, unique opportunity to help kids and teens learn how to solve problems. Again, acknowledging that they may not have caused it, and we need to figure out a way to get through it. And this is where I think modeling can be so helpful. One of the things I love about DBT is this idea that we kind of, as providers teaching it, use these in our own lives, and then we can start to model and we can start to show like, hey, when I do this, it really helps me. Let's practice it together. Let's see how this goes. So the assumptions are really at the core of what we're thinking about in this worldview. So next is what is kind of the theory behind a lot of the DBT principles. So we could spend the entire training on this. We are actually going to just do it in one slide. So I'm going to give you the quick kind of overview. So biosocial theory is really this idea that people experience emotions differently. And that impacts how they interpret their feelings and how they respond to their feelings. So you can think about a variety of responses that you might have in your own students or people in your life, right? So you might have a group of students that experience a similar situation, and you are going to get endless possibilities of how each one of those students is going to respond. What we know is that some people are born with a biological disposition to be a little bit more vulnerable emotionally. So these are the kids that are a little bit more sensitive to their environment. They feel things strongly, intensely, and when they have a big emotion, they are slow to return to baseline. So they might be more reactive. They might maybe more empathetic, feeling the feelings of other people and really connecting to it. So that the sensitivity that they have and experience emotions. And problems tend to arise, right, when you take this child who is more emotionally vulnerable and place them in an environment that is invalidating. And remember, we're all doing the best we can in any given moment. And very rarely do I believe people are purposely trying to invalidate or create an environment that doesn't allow kids to kind of understand their emotions or how to respond. But why this is important is because even really people who are trying to help are able to easily invalidate this emotionally vulnerable child, right? So this child, they know that their feelings are really big, but what they often hear in responses is that, hey, your feelings, they don't really match the situation. They're over the top, or they're just flat out wrong, right? And this might look like comments like, hey, it's not that big of a deal. And you kind of need to just move on, or if we say something like, oh, you're just being so dramatic, or you always blow things out of proportion, right? And over time, this child who is a little bit more sensitive, feels things a little bit more intensely, is getting this message that they can't trust their emotions and what they think and feel is wrong. And so what they tend to do is like push it down, really try to avoid feeling big emotions, but we also know that emotions tend to find a way to get out. And this is where, again, we start to see some of those problematic behaviors, high risk behaviors, and those things that we talked about that we are seeing in schools today. So the whole goal of DBT is to really break this cycle between the biology and the environment and help children and teens develop adaptive skills and decrease an invalidating environment. And I think that's, as providers in school, you really get to lead the charge on this. Like, how do we create a more validating and understanding environment while also teaching more adaptive ways to deal with big feelings? So before we get into skills, I just want to zoom out one more time just to show like what a adherent DBT treatment might look like. It really focuses with the individual DBT sessions, the individual seeking services in their DBT sessions, that is then really surrounded by the reinforcement and DBT skills group, which is what we're going to be focusing on today. Like, what are the skills that are adaptable to a school setting? But there's also this idea of 24-hour coaching to really support those skills and reminding them what they're working towards, a life worth living, how to be safe. And then what I also love about DBT is it really captures what it's like to be a therapist and a provider in these situations. So it's talking about the value of consulting and seeking support, and how do we also use these skills in our own practice to make us, take care of ourselves so that we can show up for other people. So, what does DBT address? What can it help us with? So, on the right, you're going to see a list of problem areas that you're probably all too familiar with in the school setting. And then on the left is this idea of the skill sets the kind of collection of skill sets in DBT that can really work to address this. So, today, we're really going to be focusing on these three. So, how do we actually start to help kids and teens become more aware of what's happening in themselves and around them and how they can respond? Right? So, when we're not aware, we tend to react on instinct. We may be more impulsive. And then looking at impulsivity, which also comes from not being as aware, right? Or wanting to avoid or changing up the situation because whatever other distress we were feeling was so uncomfortable. So we talk about distress tolerance. How do we start to build that for kids and teens? And then looking at our interpersonal effectiveness. So when we're seeing challenges in relationships, how can we support students and kids in learning how to address those? So it's important to kind of know the resources that are out there. The adult manual was originally developed by Marsha Linehan. And then a little bit later, we got this really fantastic adolescent manual that was adapted by Jill Rothaus and Alec Miller. And from that, we see an adaptation into the Step A program, really taking these skills for schools. So some of you may be familiar with that or with these resources, but I wanted you guys to kind of get a sense of where you can turn to learn more. Because of time today, we're not able to go into all the different areas. So, excuse me, why are we talking about DBT in schools? So going back to this idea that a vast majority of youth who need mental services aren't able to access them. So what happens? We're seeing all these behaviors. We're now seeing schools being asked to respond. So when they are able to receive them, we're noticing that schools are the most frequent setting for this. And it's really important to think about, like, what can DBT do? And this is really based out of research. So again, DBT is an evidence-based intervention, and it actually has some really nice outcomes. So we have learned that DBT can improve students' ability to cope with stressors. And you can think about the range of stress that your students are coming to you with. It also provides that students and staff with that common language and that skills-based toolkit, which we've already started talking about. It can work to reduce problem behaviors that lead to office referrals or disciplinary actions, or when you have to make that dreaded call to get emergency or crisis services. It works to reduce the likelihood of that special placement, so it's more cost effective, which is so important in thinking about where are we putting our resources. And what I like about DBT is we know that it works, that it is really helpful and pretty accessible. And so if we're going to be spending our money, let's make sure we're doing it with something that is going to yield results and really support our students. So again, DBT is that evidence-based and has really measurable outcomes. So this is kind of a typical way that we might set up DBT skills group. So you're going to notice in this is that mindfulness is really a key foundation of DBT. So what this could look like is one group of mindfulness, the next group you're doing a talk on distress tolerance, and then the next time you meet, you're going back to those foundation principles of mindfulness. This can also look like mindfulness at the start of a group and then reinforcing and teaching the distress tolerance or whatever skill set you're working on that day. Today, we're going to be focusing again on mindfulness, distress tolerance, and interpersonal skills. So, what is mindfulness? This is one of my all-time favorite cartoons. I've used it for years, but I think it really captures what we're trying to explain when we talk about mindfulness. So we can either, in a moment, have a mind full of all of these things, like what we did today, what we're going to have to do after you watch this video, what's going to happen with that student, what am I going to make for dinner? And we can miss all these wonderful things that are happening around us and all these opportunities to respond in a way that feels really meaningful for us. Or we can be mindful. And I love this picture because I walk my dog a lot, and it just helps me remember that, my dog is in the moment. His mind and body, they are there in the park. And as humans, we have this great ability to kind of time travel, right? We can put our mind 15 years in the past, we can think about the future, and we don't often give ourselves the opportunity to be in the current moment. So, really thinking about the importance of bringing our awareness to this moment and letting go of judgments, opinions that we have, or pushing away or rejecting the moment of what's happening. And mindfulness is really the foundation of DBT. So without mindfulness, it's really hard to access the other skills. So when in doubt, we want to go back to this place of mindfulness. We want to start practicing and building that muscle and that neural pathway in our brain, because we know that the more we practice these skills, even in times of calm and togetherness, the more we practice it, the stronger and faster our brain is going to respond, and it's going to become automatic in times of stress. So even something as simple as just really taking the time to take a nice deep breath when you're calm before you start a class. The more we do that, the easier it is when we're really stressed out or really overwhelmed to prompt ourselves to take a deep breath, notice the relaxation, and then when we're more aware and calm, we can find that we have a lot of different options on how to respond, right? And we can generally, in any moment, handle what's put in front of us. So mindfulness is really important because it builds awareness and attention, which is so key when we're trying to teach kids, not only on that social emotional side, but on the academic side. We want kids to be aware, engaged, and able to take in all the information that is being provided. But it also builds this awareness of like our emotions and what is our emotion telling us what we want. What is that emotion telling us to do, which might be an action urge? So if we can acknowledge the emotion and notice the urge, we can then reduce impulsivity. We can access skills in these moments too, right? So being aware and increasing our attention has those many benefits of increasing that ability to respond in ways that are helpful and ways that will help us regulate our own emotions. I think of this as kind of hitting the pause button, taking a moment, and then thinking clearly about how I want to move forward. And when we do this, what we notice is we can appreciate and be more grateful of times when things are going really well and when we're connecting with others. And the added big bonus is that it actually works to start decreasing suffering, right? Reduces our worries. It helps us create some distance between our automatic thoughts, our judgments, and those emotions that can feel really overwhelming. So, real quick, I always think it's helpful to have some examples of mindfulness exercises that are going to work to build that muscle and neural pathway in the brain. What's really fun about mindfulness is that it can be creative and you can really tailor it to whatever developmental age you're working with. So, for example, when I work with younger kids, sometimes I like to start out with a game like I Spy, something that they already know, but that's such a great example of a very mindful, like in the moment exercise. Um, it's also really fun to invite your students to design their own mindfulness exercises. And I'm always really grateful for the creativity that students and clients bring in these moments. Another really fun one for like teenagers is to do like a mindful or nature walk, where they're just really noticing like how many birds are in the tree, how many flowers did we pass, anything that kind of brings us into the moment, focuses us, is going to be reinforcing that neural pathway, again, making it easier to really access that in times of stress. So again, mindfulness being the foundation, we want to talk about like how does our brain actually work in times of stress. And so we all have an emotional mind and we all have a reasonable mind. For some of us, it's a little easier to access our emotional mind, and for others, maybe the reasonable mind comes more naturally. And what we know is that in times of stress, we naturally lean one way or the other, and this can really impact how we respond to a moment. So the emotional mind, I love this little inside out anger guy. It runs on like emotion, it's hot, it's reactive, but it's also what keeps us connected to others, right? And then our rational mind, it is logical and it runs on facts and it loves having a plan. And when we can bring in both of those, this ability to like acknowledge what we're feeling and remain connected, right? And have like a rational, logical response ready that blends the two, right? We notice that we have more options in front of us, and we can start to think about what's going to be the best path forward that keeps me connected and moves me towards my goal. And this is really called the wise mind. And how this might show up, right, is you have a student, they had a fight with their best friend right before their math test, and a kid who leans into their emotional mind is maybe going to walk into that classroom, stomping, head down, throw their backpack to the side, and put their head down on the desk and refuse to take the test, right? Fully in the emotional mind. I'm feeling what I'm feeling, and I don't know how to get out of it, right? A kid who leans into their reasonable mind might totally ignore the emotion and be like, that didn't bother me. That's fine. We know that's probably not true, but they're telling themselves, like, hey, it's fine. I just need to focus on the test, right? I just need to sit down, forget about my friend, focus on this test. You can see how both of those aren't really honoring like a connection or what's really happening for that student. And it's nice to think that we could just sit down and say we're totally fine, but again, remember, pain is unavoidable and it finds a way to come out. So if we're just pushing it to the side, it can lead to other behaviors that aren't helpful. So a wise mind would be like, I'm really upset about this, and I need time to figure out how to respond, because if I respond right now, it's not going to work for me. And I really do need to put this aside because this math test is important. And after I finish the test, after I get this out of the way, I can seek support and figure out like how I want to respond. And this is another place where using a shared language can be super helpful. And this is a great skill to teach your students when they come to you and they're like, I'm so anxious. I just want to run away. I can't face them. I can't possibly perform my solo, whatever they're kind of talking about. Starting to label that as, hey, that sounds like your emotional mind talking. I wonder if we can slow down and figure out, what do you think your reasonable mind is saying? And so kind of help them come up with, okay, what would be a clear kind of rational response or plan? And then how do we bring those together? Right. And then thinking about that as our wise mind, when we bring those two sides of our brains together, we can move forward with a plan that really works towards our goals and where we feel like we're in control of how we are responding and in a way that's really meaningful to us. So sometimes we can be super mindful and we can talk about our skills, and the really high intense really hot emotion is still there. And this is where distress tolerance skills really come into play. So, again, remembering this idea that pain is part of life, right? And it can't always be avoided. What we want to do is to be able to approach that pain and not make the situation worse, right? So, when we reject pain or don't accept it, we act impulsively. We see this a lot in teens. They act impulsively, take more risk, particularly when they don't want to deal with something that is uncomfortable. And when we act impulsively, other problems arise. So, again, this idea that we don't want to make the situation worse. So, the goals of distress tolerance are really surviving a crisis situation without making them worse. That's the number one goal of distress tolerance. And there are several skills in DBT that focus on this. Today, because of time, we're going to be focusing on the wise mind accepts. But if you have time and you're interested, these other skills are really great and pretty accessible to in a school setting. And we also want to be focusing on like, how do we start to accept reality, all the parts, the good parts, the painful parts, all the things that we go through as human, right? And what's nice about this is we can start to make plans. So we're building on that awareness, and we can start to make a plan of how to respond when we know things are going to be tough. So, crisis survival skills. Again, we're going to focus on wise mind accepts. And this is a really great one, I think, to do in schools with individuals that you're working with, because it's very individualized and you're actually starting to make like a toolkit or a coping kit and a cheat sheet for times when their emotional mind is maybe wanting to run the show. So the first thing is out of accepts is activities. Do something, do anything that's going to kind of take you out of those automatic thoughts that are distressing. So what can they do in school when they feel this? What can they do at home? Really just making sure that we get active and we start focusing on something else. We also know from research that the idea of contributing or helping other people can make us feel better. So what is something that they can do to help someone else or give a compliment? Thinking about comparisons, thinking about a time that you have felt worse, or a time that maybe you know somebody who went through something harder. Emotions, when we're really deep into a hard emotion, sometimes we actually want to flip the script and get into a different emotion. So this might be watching a scary movie, watching cute videos of kittens, or listening to music, something that's going to shift the emotion that we're having right now. And sometimes in these survival moments, we need to push away the painful situation temporarily, right? So how are we going to do that? What's that going to look like? Talking about replacing our thoughts. What are the automatic thoughts and what's a different way of thinking about this situation? And then another really nice one is really leaning into our five senses and sensory options, right? So what do I hear? What do I taste? What do I see? And really thinking about like what's accessible in the school setting again, and what is accessible at home. And this is where like I think working with the student and the family can be great, because you can customize these to different situations, and then you're going to want to really help them practice them over and over. And using that shared language, you can let the teacher know like, hey, this is their plan if you start to see that they're having a really hard time. I could go over distress tolerance all day. But the purpose of time, I'm going to move us into interpersonal affective skills that I think can be really helpful in school too. And interpersonal affective skills are important because what we know is that most of the time when kids are engaging in impulsive or risky behaviors, it's related to an interpersonal challenge, right? So this might be situations like they're experiencing bullying, or maybe they're really fearful of being left out. So they want to make sure that they're overly pleasing. Maybe they don't want to be looked over, right, or unnoticed. Or maybe they're really struggling to ask for what they need. And it is developmentally appropriate for kids and teens to seek help in learning how to do this, right? They need to learn how to navigate their social world. So there's some core skills here. So the first one is if you're really wanting to think about keeping and maintaining healthy relationships or making new ones, you're going to focus in on the give skills. Getting someone to do what you want, not in like a manipulative way, but like, hey, I need support, I need help. You're going to focus in on the dear man skills. And then when you want to kind of hold and maintain your self-respect, it's the fast skills. Today, we're going to focus on the first two because I think that they come up a lot in the full range of kids that you might see. So elementary and in middle school and high school. So we're focusing on this idea with the give and the dear man as a lack of skills. So we're coming into this thinking that the kid we're working with may not have the skill to handle the situation. But there are other barriers that might be contributing to interpersonal challenges. And so while we're focusing on skill building, we also want to take a moment to think about like, it may not be a lack of skill, but maybe they're so anxious that they're not able to access the skill. They're worried about rejection or what it might be like if someone made fun of them. Or maybe their emotions are really running strong in them and they're not able to access the skill that you've seen them use before. Maybe they can't decide. They can't decide which way is better and like what consequences and rewards are going to be more fitting for them. And then maybe the environment isn't open to using these skills in that moment. So thinking of like really stressful or chaotic or really judgy places, like what is that going to look like? So just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. But moving into the skills, so first we're going to talk about the give skill. So when a student wants to keep and maintain a healthy relationship with a peer, a teacher, or they maybe want to make a new friend, this skill can be particularly helpful. I like to think about asking the student, like, hey, what do you want this person, this new friend, to feel about you after this interaction? And kind of based on what they're sharing, like I want them to like me, I want them to um, play with me at recess, whatever the situation is, these skills can be really helpful. So the first one, be gentle. This is helping kids kind of understand how their tone and how their body language might come across to others. So really thinking about a gentle tone, thinking about how do we start to act interested. I think of the student who is like, hey, I really want them to be my friend, but they don't want to play the game the way that I want to play the game. And this is maybe the student that's a little rigid in that. So how do we help them show interest in what their friend likes to do? And like, how do they start to maybe ask questions about that? So how do you show interest? You make eye contact, you ask questions, you nod appropriately. And then also this idea of validating the other person and showing that you understand and care where they're coming from. And just overall using an easy manner, right? So I would pull this out just like this, the gentle, interest, validated, easy manner give, and walk them through some scenarios and have them talk about and practice what that could look like. The next one is the dear man skills. This one is really helpful when we need help and support, or maybe we want to understand something and that requires someone else in being there to explain it. This one I think is really important. You would walk your students through this one. Again, the idea is that once they have a sense of what they want to ask and what they want to do, that we're practicing, right? So role play, I love role plays. I think it really helps again with our minds understanding and getting that muscle memory of how to do this. But the first step in Dear Man is to describe. So this is really the idea of sticking to the facts, using this idea of like, we're going to be a detective, right? We're not going to put our own judgments and our opinions on it. We're going to stick to the facts. So an example might be, if a student comes to you and they're like, I'm so mad, my teacher was so unfair, that test was meant to make me fail, right? You can hear the judgments and the opinions that are in there. So the facts would be, I'm upset because that test felt really hard, right? I didn't know all the answers to the test. So then we're going to ask them to express their feelings. This is where we can use I statements. I felt unprepared to take that test, and I didn't like feeling like I failed, right? And then you're going to really work with them. And I'm going to hone in on the assert, because this is the step that's usually skipped because it's really hard for us to ask for what we want. And so we want to help our students think about what is it that they want and how do they clearly ask for that, right? So in this example on the test, it might be like, could you explain to me what I missed. Like, how did I not do well in this, even though I studied, right? And then you're going to reinforce the person who's working with you, who you're asking this from. It would really help me if I could have a little extra time with you today so that next time I feel prepared for the test and I don't feel nervous and anxious about it, like I'm going to fail. The man part is helping students and kids stay focused on what the goal is and not getting distracted by the big feelings or another topic or a situation that happened similarly. We also want to help them look and appear more confident, right? The student that comes in with their head down and is kind of, oh, I was wondering if we could talk, may not get the attention or the support that they need in that moment to be able to do these skills. So we really want to help them go in, put their shoulders back, and say, hey, Miss Miller, I want to talk to you about something. So then that the teacher or whoever they're talking to is prepared that they're wanting to have a conversation, right? It doesn't get us sidetracked. And then also this idea of negotiating. So asking for input, asking for how people can help you, and be willing to give up something to get something, be willing to hear feedback, and be willing to give feedback. And again, we are going to practice, practice, practice until they're feeling confident and ready to go in these situations. And mistakes are part of it, and that's totally fine. So that was a really quick overview of some of the skills that you can use in DBT at school. Hopefully you found a few that maybe you can start using today. Again, there are so many skills that we can pull from in DBT, so I encourage you to look at those resources we talked about and find out and explore what might work for you. But as we come to the end, I just want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about the work we are doing at Handspring. So Handspring is a virtual outpatient care for children and adolescents age 8 to 28. We are really working to provide high quality and evidence-based care for children. We tend to provide appointments after school because we value and understand what they need to be getting at school, and we want to be able to provide the support for them and making it accessible. We are really lucky to be providing services in New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Florida, North Carolina, Connecticut, and California. And we are dedicated to this idea of making high quality therapy accessible for children and families through their insurance providers. We really want people to have access to high quality care. We also know that you are all very, very busy. So we've worked hard to make our referral process as simple and easy as possible. If you have some students that you think could benefit from in-network high-quality outpatient care, we would love if you would refer them to us. And there's a couple of ways you can do this. The first one is direct your families that you're working with to our website where they can easily schedule a free consultation with a member of our team. The second one is you can start that process for them by reaching out to us on our website and emailing us, and then notifying a team member that will then reach out to the family. And then for a lot of our school partners, we offer a special referral portal for schools and school districts that are interested to make this referral process even simpler, even more simple. And if you are interested in doing this, please just reach out to our team and we'll help you get that set up. So thank you all for your time today. I'm happy to answer questions when we meet again. And hopefully this just gave you a nice overview of DBT and the things that you can be doing in the schools to really support the students and each other as you're on the forefront of really finding that support and mental health care for our children and youth. Thank you so much.